All right, let's talk about the Pentagon's budget. And when I say talk about it, I mean we're diving into a world where numbers are so big, they're measured in trillions. We're going to look at weapons that cost more than some countries' entire economies, and a financial system so messed up its own leaders are telling us we should be, and I quote, terrified.
And get this, that's not some critic or an outsider talking. Nope, that's a direct quote from the Army's top civilian leader, Daniel Driscoll. He was talking about a system so hollowed out by waste that it's actually become a danger in and of itself. And to really get what a system like that looks like, we've got to start with a story about this one single, forgotten warehouse. You know, to wrap your head around a problem this huge, sometimes you have to start really, really small. And in this case, our story begins right here.
Okay, so this one story, it just perfectly captures the whole problem. Back in 2019, the Navy literally just stumbles upon a warehouse that wasn't even on its books. And inside, a cool $126 million in spare parts. But here's the kicker. The wildest part of it all, it had parts for the F-14 Tomcat, you know, the jet from Top Gun, a plane that had been retired for 13 years. This isn't just some little inventory mix-up. It's a sign of a system that can literally lose track of an asset worth 9 figures.
All right, so now let's zoom out. Let's see how this problem scales up. From a warehouse full of old parts to one of the most expensive government programs in the history of the world. Okay, first up, $85 million. What is that? Well, that's the value of over 1 million spare parts for the F-35 fighter jet. Parts that the main contractor, Lockheed Martin, either lost, damaged, or just plain destroyed over just 5 years. And here's the real shocker. The government apparently only had visibility into less than 2% of those losses. Just 2%. And believe me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The Pentagon thinks its contractors are holding on to about $220 billion worth of F-35 spare parts. But here's the thing. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, says that number is probably, and I'm quoting them here, significantly understated. Why? Because the DoD can't even easily get into the contractor's records to check if it's right. Which brings us to this number, the total estimated lifetime cost for the F-35 program. $1.7 trillion. I mean, by just about any measure you can think of, it's the most expensive weapon system in all of history. So you've got this huge gap between what was promised and what we actually got. The whole idea behind the F-35 was that it would be this money-saving Swiss Army knife of a jet. You know, one single plane for the Air Force, Navy, and Marines. But the reality? It's been a program just constantly bogged down by insane costs and all sorts of technical problems, from the engines to the software. But the thing is, the problems with the F-35 aren't just a one-off thing. They're actually a symptom of a much bigger department-wide breakdown when it comes to just basic financial accountability. Just look at this timeline. It really shows the pattern here. The Pentagon was first required to do an annual audit way back in 2018. Since then, it has failed every single time. By 2025, it had already failed its 8th audit in a row. And each time, the auditors give it what's called a disclaimer of opinion, which is basically just accounting speak for, hey, your books are such a mess, we can't even begin to form an opinion.
And to put that failure into perspective, in fiscal year 2023, the Department of Defense had $3.8 trillion in assets. That's more than the entire economy of the United Kingdom. And out of all that, it could only properly account for $1.4 trillion. That means a jaw-dropping $2.4 trillion, or 63% of its total assets, were just unaccounted for.
So why? How does this even happen? Well, at its core, it's a total data nightmare. The Department of Defense is running on over 2,000 different financial systems. A lot of them are decades old, they don't talk to each other, they're not integrated. I mean, just imagine trying to balance the books for the biggest organization on the planet using 2,000 different completely incompatible spreadsheets. It's impossible.
Okay, so if the system is so obviously broken, why does it just keep going? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the powerful interests that actually benefit from it. It's a structure that was called out more than 60 years ago. This is President and, let's not forget, former 5-star General Dwight D. Eisenhower during his famous farewell address. He warned us about this powerful link between the military, private industry, and politicians. And what's really fascinating is that in his original draft of the speech, he actually included one more word. He called it the military-industrial congressional complex, explicitly pointing the finger at the role politicians play in driving this whole system. And today, that complex is dominated by just a tiny handful of players. Between 2020 and 2024, almost a third of all the Pentagon's contract money, that's $771 billion, went to just 5 companies. And to really get a sense of that scale, consider this. That amount is more than double what the U.S. spent on all of its diplomacy and humanitarian aid combined over that same period.
So a key piece of what keeps the system running is something called the revolving door. This is the process where top Pentagon officials and military leaders retire from their government jobs one day and then take these incredibly high-paying positions as executives, board members, or lobbyists for the exact same defense contractors they used to oversee.
And this isn't some rare thing that happens once in a while. No, between 2018 and 2023, over 81% of retired 4-star generals and admirals went to work for the arms industry. What this does is it creates this incredibly powerful network of influence, where inside knowledge and personal relationships can end up shaping trillion-dollar decisions. But look, this isn't just some abstract accounting problem. This system has a very real-world price tag, and it's measured in opportunity costs, all the other things we don't fund, and ultimately in human lives.
So take that $1.7 trillion F-35 program. Now look over here at the proposed increases in funding for critical domestic needs in the 2025 budget. We're talking a $2.3 billion increase for childcare, a $2 billion boost for life-saving medical research, a $25 million increase to fight the opioid crisis. The entire lifetime cost of this one single weapons program just absolutely dwarfs these crucial investments.
But the cost isn't just about budgets and what-ifs. At the end of the day, the ultimate purpose of all this spending is war. And war has an undeniable human toll. 4.5 to 4.7 million. That is the estimated number of people who have died as a result of the U.S. post-9/11 wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and other places. And this number, which comes from Brown University's Costs of War project, it includes both the direct deaths from violence and the indirect deaths, the ones that come from the destruction of hospitals, infrastructure, and entire economies. It is the final and most profound cost of this trillion-dollar system. Which brings us right back to where we started, with Eisenhower's warning. You know, when you look at a system that can account for trillions of its own assets, a system that's heavily influenced by just a handful of contractors, and one that ultimately fuels conflicts with such a staggering human cost, you have to ask yourself, is this the disastrous rise of misplaced power that he told us all to guard against? And that's the question this explainer really leaves us with.